after a very intense day in Addis Ababa, which saw Amina Mohamed losing her bid to become the African Union Commission chair, losing to the former Chadian Prime Minister, Mr. Mahamat, we want to take a look and see whether that leaves Kenya in a good position or in a bad position. We're joined by people who are very, very experienced in this, including you, who was our foreign editor, so you're good at analysis. And I want to begin with the analysis bit.
Yes.
We sort of threw everything at this bid. If you think about the president going off on a tour of Africa, especially the deputy president, a whole lot of cabinet members, Amina Mohamed herself, this seems like a huge setback.
Yes, Kantai, it is true in that regard, but there are a lot of other issues that were in play. And these were the trade-offs that Kenya was going to give, say, in relation to the support from certain, what I would call anchor nations and anchor blocks in the OAU. And the issue was, what was the trade-off for those other countries? What would Kenya put on the table?
And those tend not to be public, do they?
Of course not. And the issues is not that whether Amina was qualified. She is eminently qualified and competent. But the bigger issue, this was, is nation, national interest and trade-offs. And what do you give for me to, so to speak, to scratch your back? So what was Kenya's raison to have her there? What was the trade-off? And those were issues that were never really put on the table.
You're a retired ambassador, and I want to ask you to be a bit less diplomatic, to try and dig through to the bottom of this. The candidacy seemed to be very surprising, very abrupt actually. Came very suddenly in September after the first round of voting had failed in July in Kigali. Suddenly President Kenyatta goes ahead and puts her forward as a candidate for the AUC. Suddenly there's this huge amount of effort put into it, money and everything. Was it a candidacy that was thought through at the very last moment, or was it that we're not organized enough to actually have built this up as a candidacy that would succeed?
Well, like you rightly put it, for me, it should have been thought through earlier enough and not an abrupt kind of approach in this matter. But having said that, Amina, well qualified for the position, her past experience is well qualified, but you must also look at other soft issues that go along with these elections. For example, the Francophone countries, they were there before, during JLP. We had Zuma, English speaking. And we have this unwritten rule that the chairmanship goes to the small countries. Other than this time when we had Zuma coming in, and he actually bulldozed the whole process.
So they were trying to take back their
Exactly, they were trying to get back their chairmanship.
The thing is though, and if you look at the commentary that's been there from, especially on social media, some of it expert, some of it bit of noise, is we seem to be pushing this as a very big loss for Amina Mohamed, a very big loss for Uhuru Kenyatta, a very big loss for Kenya. But in effect, if you look at the pattern of voting, as was in the story they carried by Enoch Sikolia, she lost on penalties. It was all the way 90 minutes, 180 minutes, 6 rounds of voting, where the difference in votes was 1 or 2 votes between herself and the Chadian candidate.
Yes.
At the very last round, in effect, the very last penalty, it failed. So all this analysis that we're doing, we have been doing the opposite analysis if we just turned the other way.
But perhaps the bigger issue is, why did then the bloc, what I would call the Southern bloc, shall I say, decline, so to speak, they abstained. In normal diplomacy, what they did as a bloc, they withdrew. Now, that in itself tells you that perhaps the Kenyan negotiating or the diplomatic offensive had failed to read what was happening in the SADC. I call them the Southern Anchor, and those are 10 countries. She lost, as Enos is saying. Mohammed had 38, yes. And Amina had 28. That is the Southern African bloc.
Those are substantials.
Yes, and those blocks, why did they, as a bloc, abstain?
Yes. When I look at it, Kenya having lost, it's not a lost cause. We just need to re-strategize. Next time we are looking for such positions, what must we do? Can we be able to reach out? Because this is geopolitics.
But it seemed, my point is, we seemed to have reached out. It seemed to have been, it's almost similar to what happened when someone like Hillary Clinton lost.
Yes.
She did everything. She won the popular vote. She did all that. However, she lost in a certain way, in a certain manner of counting. In the same way, Amina Mohamed went all the way through, leading at some point in some crucial rounds. At the very last minute, some people would argue we couldn't have done it differently.
But like I mentioned, we must also realize the Francophone, the softer issues that don't come out so strongly. That's what, for me, played out on Amina. Strong candidate, but then the issue of the SADC group actually abstaining affected the whole process.
And there's talk, unconfirmed, and I'll tell you it's unconfirmed, that the EAC as well, there are some countries that may not have voted with us.
I would not be surprised. And as I said, Kantai, look at it this way. President Uhuru was, as of last minute, as of yesterday, he was speaking to the Namibian president, Gengo. And I think the key issue was to try, could you then turn this as a bloc?
On behalf of SADC.
On behalf of SADC.
One final question before we leave it. Amina Mohamed, what are her next options? She's done the foreign ministry. She didn't get the WTO position. It's highly doubtful that Africa's stand for the UN is coming up anytime soon, at least within the course of her career. She seemed to have reached the ceiling.
It would be unfortunate for her to reach that conclusion. I think she still has a long way to go. The question is, as a candidate of Kenya, does Kenya have the diplomatic wherewithal, diplomatic reach, diplomatic, what shall I say, trade-offs that you could leverage on her skills? Remember.
No, hold on. What jobs are available? That's the point I was making.
But honestly speaking, Wallace, I'm looking at it. It was Kenya.
It was not Amina, and that's
I accept that. What I'm saying is, like, if you look at Amina herself,
yes.
We'll put Kenya aside because we still have opportunities.
Yes.
But Amina Mohamed herself, who's a very accomplished diplomat,
yes,
she has tried for some very top positions, including the World Trade Organization. She didn't succeed. She's now tried for the African Union Commission chair. She didn't succeed. Now, there's almost nothing. If you look at that scope of international jobs, there's nothing else left.
Possibly the East African community, possibly. Or in any case, a lot of opportunities come in. The bigger question for me is that perhaps was this campaign too early, or was it too, as my ambassador is saying here, perhaps rushed? And perhaps Amina is suffering from what we would call being the right candidate, but at the wrong time. And also, perhaps Kenya, in my view, perhaps was, and I think we're having that discussion, perhaps Kenya was in many ways punching above its weight.
Wait. That's a very...
and I would say this.
It's a very funny argument to make because people always say Kenya punches below its weight.
On this one, Kenya was punching way above its weight. That's what I'm saying. Indeed, because there are 5 anchor countries and 5 blocks.
Yes.
And indeed, what happened, transpired today, the SADC countries decided, other than commit and create what we call a diplomatic issue with a lot of other, is to abstain. The total effect meaning that Amina lost. And indeed, despite Kenya's very active diplomatic engagement. Remember, Kenya was Western Africa, Northern Africa. We didn't hear much of Southern Africa because of the Botswana.
Except when Jacob Zuma came here,
and indeed, he didn't commit on that one. And as of yesterday, President Uhuru was meeting Gachie, and I don't think that was perhaps last minute that will you as a bloc. And indeed, it was a bloc issue today. It was not on individual. It was a bloc.
Yeah. For me, I think there's still room. She can still serve as our foreign affairs minister. There are still regional blocks that she can serve on. International, in the UN, she can still serve as much as she was there, but she can still go back. For me, it has profiled her for bigger jobs. IGAD, for example, East Africa Committee, the way John has put it. So there's still scope for her to serve the country in international politics.
All right, that is just a bit of an analysis after this afternoon's election that happened in Addis Ababa for the African Union Commission chair. Amina Mohamed lost in the very last round to the new African Union Commission chair, who is from Chad. That is Honorable Mahamat, who's coming in to replace Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma from South Africa. For now, that is it.